Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Depth Insights, where we take a depth psychological look at news and events going on in your world. My name is Bonnie Bright, and I'm your host, and I'm also the founder of Depth Psychology Alliance, which is a free online community for everyone who is interested in depth and Jungian psychologies. And I have with me today as my guest Robert Bosnak, who is a Jungian analyst, and we're going to be discussing his brand new books that are just coming out, and those are called Red Sulphur Alchemy. And so we'll be getting into a little bit of the alchemical processes today and finding out what Robert's been up to. Meanwhile, just to tell you a little bit about Robert, he grew up in Holland and he studied alchemy for over 40 years. And as I mentioned, he's a Jungian analyst and he has a practice in Los Angeles, and he's also the author of 5 books. Primarily in nonfiction, though, so this is really something new for Robert, and I'm excited to hear what he's going to bring us. His books have been in the fields of dreaming and creative imagination, and they've been translated into over a dozen languages. Robert has also developed a method which is called embodied imagination, and this is used widely in psychotherapy and also applied worldwide to a bunch of different creative endeavors. And the Red Sulphur saga, which we will be talking about today, is his first published work of fiction. So, Robert, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here with me.
Well, thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yes, it is. I can't wait to dig into this because, again, I know you from your books, which are primarily on dreams and Jungian and depth psychological topics. Not that this isn't, but this is really a bit of a divergence for you as you're going into the fictional side of things.
Well, we also know each other from the alchemy seminars that are also partly on your site from the Jung platform that are beginning again in January 8th.
Absolutely.
Semester.
Yes, thank you for reminding all of us of that, actually. For those of you who are interested in that, and maybe we'll come back to that at the end again, that particular series is hosted and sponsored by Jung Platform and in conjunction with Depth Psychology Alliance, which hosts the written forum for everybody who's in that series. And that series is a 10-session series, and so it gets to be pretty extended, and we get into a lot of detail, and I know you're doing that with Pat Berry also. And it's been fun. The first one that we did last year was really quite remarkable, and we got to know some of the students a bit in the forum, and I'm sure it set the tone for a lot of people who will be listening to this now who have now a better background in alchemy.
Good.
Yes, but I would like to go into that a bit because you don't have to have a background in alchemy to appreciate and enjoy these new books. Why don't you start by just giving us a little bit of set the stage for us for these books. First of all, what's happening as we jump in, and who are some of the characters that we're going to meet?
Well, the book is based on true events that are described initially in a letter by Benedict de Spinoza, one of the great philosophers of the second millennium. And he describes that he has gone to a silversmith called Brechteld, who has tested gold that was given to him by a doctor, the doctor of the Prince of Orange, that was transformed from lead into gold. And the strange thing about it is, he says in the letter, that when he tested this gold and mixed it with silver for the test, some of the silver, 1/3 of the silver, was also transformed into gold.
Mm-hmm.
And this was tested by several people there, the mint master of the Netherlands, as I said, the doctor of the Prince of Orange, several scientists of the time, and Spinoza verified that this had actually happened. And then he went to Helvetius' house and saw the gold, and these were people that were not easily fooled. So the novel is based on these facts, and then it starts with a man who is an alchemist called Theodore Mondanus, who is an actual alchemist of whom we know a little bit. But he is entering into The Hague to demonstrate for Dr. Helvetius that lead can be transformed into gold. And he has the last 3 pieces of Red Sulphur. Now, Red Sulphur, that's the name of the book. The name of the book is Red Sulphur, the Greatest Mystery in Alchemy, because Red Sulphur is the greatest mystery in alchemy. It's what other people call the Philosopher's Stone. So the whole mystery of alchemy goes around the Philosopher's Stone, around the Red Sulphur. He has these last 3 pieces of the Red Sulphur that he inherits inherited from his great-great-great-grandfather, Solomon Trismosin, who was actually one of the great alchemists of the 15th century, or it was a pseudonym, we don't know, but he wrote the book Splendor Solis, which is one of the great books of all time of alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
So he has these three last pieces of red sulfur. Now what red sulfur can do, it can not only transform lead into gold, but Montanus, has devised ways that it can also heal the plague. So it's a very, very important creative possibility. And now he's being chased by the Duke of York, the one after whom New York is named, who is running out of money because he has his adventurers in Africa where he wants to get part of the slave trade, and he is after Montanus to get the red sulfur so that he can make gold, and everybody's beginning to be after him, and also a very mysterious ghost-like fellow who is also after him that we have no idea who that is. And Montanus falls in love with the wife of Helvetius, and the wife of Helvetius is someone who is barren and cannot have children, and her niece, who grew up with her as her daughter, falls in love with Montanus, and we get a triangle between Montanus, Marianne, the wife of Helvetius, and the niece Clara. The story is of how they live and how they live with this very difficult triangle, how they have children, and these children are the incarnation of red sulfur in a body. And that's how it's going to continue in these 5 books. It is also about the lives of these children as they grow up. And then the sideshow in the whole thing is how this all affects the relationship with William III, who is the Prince of Orange, and who is the only marshal who can fight Louis XIV, who wants to become the Emperor of Europe to create the second Charlemagne empire. So that is basically the setup.
Well, this is amazing, Robbie, because I think, obviously it's not a simple story. There's so many characters and so many facets to this, and it's clearly a saga that spans a couple of generations at least, it sounds like. And not only is it, historically based and brings us all the drama of that age, if you will, and also of a time when alchemy was really starting to shift into what we now know as science. It's also a love story, and I really like that too, that you've brought that into it. And of course, I don't want you to give everything away because I can't.
No, but
I haven't
alchemy,
finished it
the part of it is that alchemy is about love. And that is what people frequently forget, because when chemistry came in, love and knowledge were separated.
Right.
But in the time of alchemy, love and knowledge was the same thing. You knew by way of love. Like when you fall in love, you know a person in a particular way. And that is the way that the alchemists knew their materials, by loving them.
Wow, that's a beautiful statement. It seems like when the science came in, and of course many of us who have studied this are aware that what happened was sort of a loss of soul in the world when the science became so positivistic.
May I beg to disagree?
Please.
I don't think it was a loss of soul. It was soul fell in love with another image. Soul was in love with the sense of that the world was alive and animated, and then soul fell in love with reason. And reason began to excite soul. And so it was a movement in soul itself, where soul moved from her love for magic to her love for reason. And it was not a loss of soul, it was a change of soul.
I see what you're saying.
I think the whole notion of this loss of soul is all, I have very, very strong problems with that.
Well, I guess looking at it that way, how can soul be lost? It can't be lost.
Yeah.
The question is, where did it go if it goes, somewhere else? And so as you're describing this makes a lot of sense. And I really like that image of it as you present it.
Because what Montanus says at a certain point, with a sense of melancholy, that his generation stands between magic and ratio. because after him, and Isaac Newton was one of the great alchemists, and in book 4 Isaac Newton becomes very important. Isaac Newton was a great alchemist, and he went to calculus. So this is a generation that stands between magic and calculus.
Mm. Oh, that's a really important position, particularly right now in our world where at least I should speak for myself, but I think a lot of times it's very difficult to balance those two things, to find the in-between place where we don't allow one to kind of overrun the other one. And also to locate ourselves in that. We need science for obvious reasons, and we need soul for obvious reasons. And so being able to
don't separate them. Don't separate science and soul. Please. Science is full of soul.
That's true. Absolutely. That's true. I guess I look at it as a continuum.
Yeah. It's a different kind of soul. And the scientific, and the book is basically about the clash between the alchemical soul and the scientific soul. Both valid ways of soul, and it's that break point. And Salomon Trismosan has left the Red Sulphur to show us that there was once a generation that was able to look through to the core of matter and find the creative spark there, and make these sparks into a stone that was the concentration of all creativity. Because for the alchemists, the alchemists were also atomists. So the core of the atom for the alchemist was inspiration, and the core for the scientists of the atom is energy. So it is a movement from inspiration to energy, but it is just as much soul.
That's great, and I like how you describe it as a clash, because that definitely feels that way.
It's a great clash. That's why I love the 17th century. The 17th century is the height of that clash. It is when there was still the afterglow of alchemy, and when Descartes was just beginning to be, Descartes dies in 1650. My novel started in 1666. Several of the people in the novel have been pupils of Descartes, and so it is the moment when Descartes is just entering into the culture. It is before the Enlightenment. It is when these two ways of soul can still live together and can still love together. And a part of the story is discussions between Christian Huygens, who's one of the greatest scientists of all times, who came up with the wave nature of light, who came up with many theories of time, created incredible clocks. He was a great scientist, and discussions between him and Mondanus and Marianne. Marianne, the lover of Mondanus, is herself a great alchemist. These are very powerful women. Clara is the great weaver of her time. She can weave incredible cloth that is made with the red sulfur and is magic cloth. And so the women in this novel are of particular power.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that, because maybe not everyone that's listening to this will be familiar with some of the terms of alchemy. But early on in the first novel, the main character, Mondanus, he recognizes that the wife of Helvetius is what you call a Soror Mystica, which is a term in alchemy. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, particularly what it means to Mondanus as the main character?
Yeah. As I said before, alchemy is about love, and therefore the alchemist had a Soror Mystica, so that together they would create the work, because it was the love and the passion between them that would be infused into the material, and then the material, because the material is alive, the material would respond with its own love for them. So it's a triangular relationship between the alchemist, the Soror Mystica, and the material, and they're all wildly in love with each other, and out of that come the transformation of the materials. And so an alchemist has to have a Soror Mystica, or a Soror Mystica has to have the counterpart, but we only know about a few women alchemists. We mainly know about Sororis Mystica, but I think that the Soror Mystica is an alchemist, of course. It is just because it comes from a masculinist culture, he was called the alchemist and she was called the Soror, but that's, in this book, Marianne is actually a greater adept than Mondanus. She is, in the end, she will turn out to be the wisest in the book. She's a remarkable woman. I am in love with that character.
Hmm. And she seems very intuitive in the beginning, and of course, it's recognized quite early on that she is actually the alchemist in this
Yes.
story. So,
Yeah, because she's married to Helvetius, and Helvetius has written an article against alchemy. That's why Montanus is going to visit Helvetius, because Helvetius has written vitriolically against alchemy, and so Montanus has come to do a demonstration before him, because Helvetius is very influential, being the physician of the Prince of Orange, who is one of the leaders of the country.
mm,
And so he lets that transformation happen before Montanus, and then it appears that Helvetius has this very ambivalent relationship to alchemy, and that actually Marianne, to whom he's married, is the alchemist.
and in this whole Soror Mystica thing, does it matter that she is feminine? What's the importance of that?
So that she's a woman.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it matters tremendously, because this is the whole story is a heterosexual story. If it were a homosexual story, she could have been a boy or a young man or an older man or whatever. But this is a heterosexual story, so it's about sexuality. It's about sexual passion, because part of the novel is about how the stone has to be activated by the goddess Diana, who is the huntress, and because the huntress has to be infused into the stone so she can start hunting other materials and shoot her arrows into those other materials so that they can become gold as well. She is the twin sister of the sun, and so she has to be activated through passion and love, and that happens between the alchemist and the soror.
Yes, so it seems like there's a lot of triangles that you've mentioned are going on. Is
Yes.
the triangle a common symbol in alchemy?
Very fundamental. The triangle belongs to Mars, and so it's the god of war, but not just the god of war, the god of struggle. And it's a very dynamic number, and anybody who's ever been in a triangular relationship can attest to that. And so it's a highly dynamic number that creates a lot of heat. It's the red planet, of course, Mars, and so it's very hot, and Mars's metal is iron. So it's a steel kind of attitude, and a very powerful force.
You know, as much as I learn about alchemy, I just feel like there's always more and more that there is to
Oh yeah,
learn.
you can study this forever. That's why the alchemists used to say the art is long and life is short.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. What was your motivation, Robbie, to write this series of novels after the work that you've done in the past has been nonfiction work? It's kind of interesting
Yeah.
that you've chosen
Well,
now to.
I've written quite some fiction, but I've never felt it valid for publication. I've written science fiction. This is 17th century science fiction.
Hmm.
I love the 17th century, and I love science fiction. So I wanted to write science fiction, and I have been writing science fiction, but nothing of good enough level. You have to see, my problem, of course, is I'm not a native speaker. I learned English when I was 13 in high school, and then I was married to an American woman for many, many years, and so that's where I learned. I mean, the pillow is the best place to learn a language, and so that's how I learned English, and my English became better and better, and it was good enough for writing nonfiction. And I have gotten compliments that my nonfiction books are written quite well, but it was not yet good enough for fiction. I know that because I've written 3 novels before, and the language just didn't gel.
Hmm.
But now I had read about the Helvetius affair, and the first novel is called The Helvetius Affair. I had read about the Helvetius Affair, that's what Spinoza names it. I had read about the Helvetius Affair and had written an article about it in Spring Publications, in Spring Journal, about Red Sulphur, because we always go from that point of view, especially Jungians do, and especially Jung does, but Hillman does too, that these are psychological events. And the historians of alchemy actually are very cross with Jung about that, because it is not primarily psychological events, because the notion of psychology is a rational notion. Psychology has the idea that you can separate matter and mind, because they go from I won't go too deeply into this. They go from a dichotomy between body and mind, whereas the alchemist worked with the living imagination, and the living imagination was fully embodied. That's why my work is called Embodied Imagination. So the alchemist worked with the material as it was alive, and therefore splitting it and saying this is something that happens in the psyche of the alchemist is a thoroughly 19th century notion, completely 19th century, and Jung was wedded to it. And so I said, now why don't we go from the point of view that one of the greatest minds of the second millennium, Spinoza, that he was actually seeing something, that actually in front of the eyes of these very smart people, silver was transformed into gold by gold that was made from red sulfur. Let's take that as a fact. Let's not run away from it and say, no, this couldn't happen, because it can't happen. We now know since 1957 that on a daily basis, lead transforms into gold in all nuclear reactors. The leaden mantle transforms into gold. That happens. It's just too expensive to do it commercially because it adds one electron. So that lead can be transformed into gold, we know is possible. And so let's assume that. And if we assume that, then this and this and this and this, it's like a domino effect. Then all these kind of things are possible as well. And then I thought, this is a novel.
And indeed it is. You know, it's interesting how you're talking about the mastery of language that's required to be able to write good fiction, and I absolutely agree with that. I've always been an avid reader, and I particularly enjoy reading these kinds of novels. So again, I'm just so excited. But I have to say, you really have done an amazing job, Robert, in bringing that language into play, because as I have been reading these novels, I really find myself kind of caught up in the spell of it. You know, it's almost an alchemical process that feels like it's working on me as I do the reading. And so in addition to the plot, which does pull you along, and the historical value to me, at least because I'm interested in the topic, you know, there's also something that does seem to be occurring with these.
Well, I did that on purpose.
That was my question.
Yeah. With every scene, this is the wonderful age of Google. With every scene, I had a painting of that scene, and I worked from the paintings, so that everything I'm describing was actually painted in the 17th century. And so that you're walking through paintings. All the words that I'm using, I've checked all the words that they existed in the 17th century. So I'm not using any words that when the dictionary says that they were from the 18th century, I'm not using them. So I threw out all the words that didn't exist, and so the words that you have in the book are all existent in the 17th century, and I was very sorry I had to throw out one name. The name was Carambole, which worked really well for the character, and then I found that the word Carambole was first coined in 1720, and this character came in 1670, so the word Carambole didn't exist, so I had to call him Mr. Billiards, because billiards already existed. And so therefore you get pulled into the 17th century. That's what I'm trying to do, so that you have the feeling that you're walking around in this magical 17th century where you never really know where you are.
Yeah. I'm sure that's also akin to the alchemy process. Sometimes you don't know where you are in the process.
All the time you don't know where you are. You have, this is what Keats calls negative capability. You have to have the ability to stay in the unknown and not rush towards knowing.
Yeah. What about the setting? It takes place, or at least it starts in the Netherlands, which of course is meaningful to you because that's where you're from and where you grew up. Yeah. Are you interested because these facts actually issued from the Netherlands, or was that completely a European?
Well, it was a beautiful side effect, because the main thing that I'm interested in is that it is the most reliable report that we have of a transmutation from lead into gold, because I trust Spinoza, because I think that he was a very honest man and a very perceptive man, and these days many of the philosophers go back to Spinoza all the time. and he is recognized as one of the 10 great minds of the second millennium. So if that man says something, I want to give it the benefit of the doubt at least. And it happened in The Hague, so I know that culture. I know that culture really well because I grew up in the culture before it changed, before it became contemporary. The Dutch culture has changed tremendously over the last 40 years, but I knew it from before that, from right after the war, and so I had an enormous advantage, and I've always been interested in Dutch history and European history, and so I had an advantage that I knew the language, that I could read the history in Dutch, but it also moves. The novel over the whole saga moves from The Hague to Venice to Vienna, then it moves to London and Cambridge, and then it ends up in Philadelphia.
Hmm. Wow, that's quite a journey
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
to the new world. What you talk a lot about these people who actually were real people, and some
Yes.
of them have
Mm-hmm.
come through in whatever variation in the novels. And also in the novel itself, the main characters refer back to these people as their ancestors.
Yeah.
You say in your synopsis that you've written this down to honor the ancestors. What role have those ancestors had for you? Are you talking about your personal ancestors or?
No, 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 no. I'm talking about the ancestors in the sense that Aboriginal people talk about ancestors. Um, the ancestors are alive around us as when you walk through a city, for instance, and especially a European city, um, 90% of the people who built these cities are dead. They're the ancestors, they left something behind. Their spirits are still there in what they left behind. And I'm just coming back from a place called Lake Mungo in the outback in Australia that has been inhabited for 100,000 years. It's the oldest continuously inhabited place in the world. For 100,000 years, people have been there, and the ancestors go back to the people that came from the stars. So those are the ancestors that I'm talking about.
Hmm. So such a lovely image. And so nice to know that it's being somehow preserved and transmitted through this practice of alchemy.
Yes.
Even as much as our understanding of alchemy has shifted, and a lot of us listening to this have that influence from Jung and his own ideas and projections about it. But there's so much that's preserved in there, and
Yes.
it's good to see
Well,
that.
it was the notion that when the divine created this world, he left it unfinished, or he, she,
Mm.
left it unfinished, and that we have to refine it and refine it and refine it to get to the core and the essence of it so that we can participate in the creative energy of creation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I think it was Gerald Dorn, who's one of the well-known alchemists. He said you
Yeah.
have to transform yourselves into the living philosophical stone. You have to become
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes, and that I think is already a beginning of a move towards a separation and the sense that the alchemist himself had to become a philosophical stone.
Uh-huh.
Nobody would have said that in the 15th
Uh-huh.
century.
Because they already
This
were.
already, no, they didn't distinguish.
Yeah.
The notion that the notion of interiority is a notion that is very much comes in from Christianity, but my field is creative imagination and dreaming. And when you are in a dream, there is very little interiority; it's all exterior. So the notion that there is a difference between the interior and the exterior is very recent. It's maybe from the 16th, 17th century. Before that, transform yourself into stones, the alchemist would not differentiate between themselves and the stone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But this is a very hard concept to grasp. We're so conditioned, and of course, again, I'm speaking for myself, but we're so conditioned in the culture that most of us have grown up in, and things that we take completely for granted to create that separation. So how do we go
Well,
about?
that's the reason in the novel why Trismosin, who knew that this was going to happen because he had long conversations with Copernicus in Italy, and he knew that the world would become Copernican. that it would move from the core of creation to the crust of material. And that's why he left a stone behind, so that we would know that there was a chasm, a deep, profound chasm in time. There's this notion in the book that time is not linear. Time is moving in cycles of inspiration. That's why I get so upset when people say the world is no longer ensouled. No, in different cycles of inspiration, the world is inspired differently. Now we're inspired by ratio, and we create airplanes, but people who create airplanes put their heart and soul into it. And so, but there was a chasm, and the chasm we have to, that's exactly what you're saying. It's so difficult to step over that chasm into a time where the differentiation between inner and outer didn't make much sense, where everything around is alive, where there is no differentiation between love and knowledge, all those kind of things. That's what I try to bring out in the novel, to pull people into it, not with their thoughts, but with their bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I'd like to revisit, I want to make sure before we actually end, is this whole idea that matter is alive. You know, you mentioned that there's this triangle between the alchemist, the Soror, Mystica, and the material, where they love each other passionately. And I thought of this idea of material loving us passionately. And of course, that brings me back to Hillman, who he's been known to say that things would project into us their thoughts and ideas just as much as we would project with them. They are equally alive and intelligent. Yeah. What do you think about that?
I don't like the notion of projection. I think that comes from the 19th century and is part of photography and of film. So I like the word love better. So I think the material loves us and loves itself into us, and we love ourselves into the material. But for the rest, I totally agree.
Good. Well, question for you though, you know, if the material loves us, and maybe this is maybe a question that can't be answered, but you know, it makes me just wonder about what's happening on our planet today, and so much of the devastation and the ecological destruction that we're facing, in part because of our culture and the way that we use materials. And so the question is, does that material still love us, or what's happening to that relationship, or what needs to happen to that relationship so that does a shift need to occur?
Well, I think that I'm reminded of Lake Mungo, where they had sheep grazing in places where sheep have absolutely no place to graze, that they shouldn't be there. But they were brought from England to Australia, and they ate up the whole land, and sheep should be in New Zealand. And I'm going to get a lot of sheep farmers in Australia angry. But anyway, so they created great devastation in Lake Mungo, but the Aboriginal people that I spoke to said, well, but it always changed. The land always changed, and things always changed, and then they come back again. So I think that, yes, I agree, there is great devastation going on, and but we are living in this linear notion of time. So we project, and this is projection in a different way, we project ourselves into the future as if time is linear. But I think that time goes in cycles, and I think that we can cycle out of this into a new cycle of being, in which in technology is called creative innovation, disruptive innovation, in which there will be another great disruption by which we will start dealing with this. And I do agree with you that it is a very dire situation, but for many years I worked on the image of apocalypse in politics, and the apocalyptic notion sets up a creation of doom, and if there's an end of time, and if you have a sense that we are living in the end of time, then you no longer get into the idea that we have to do this, and our children have to do this, and our grandchildren have to take care of everything the way that you brush your teeth every day. This is not the end of the world. I think the notion of the end of the world is something that a generation wants to be feeling important, that we are living in the end of time. that this has been going on for hundreds of years, that people, thousands of years, that people feel that they live in the end of time. This is not the end of time. This is a difficult period, and we all have to work on it the way that we brush our teeth every evening and every morning.
Yeah, in the novels, one of the characters says that the stone has to want to come into being, or else the work is in
Yes,
vain. So do you
right.
think that there's a certain kind of
Chris Mosman
trust?
says that.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
there a certain kind of
Uh,
trust that has to happen in order for the alchemy to work?
Absolutely. Yes. It has to be, a relationship has to be there. And a relationship has to be there, and a mutual commitment has to be there. Because the stone will not commit if the alchemist is not committed. And we know that. You know that if you're not committed to your work, nothing will come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is that it's a mutual commitment between the material and the alchemist.
Mm. Oh, good stuff. I can't wait to finish the series. So tell us a little bit about that as we wrap up here. I know the first 2 books are available.
They are now on Amazon, so people can actually order them. They're $3.99 as ebooks. The print book is coming out. The price has not been set yet, but probably I want to sell it for around $13.13. It comes out in January, and so will the book at Audible, that is read by Suzanne Toren, who's an award-winning narrator and a beautiful voice actress.
Yes.
And stage actress. You can listen to the first chapter on the website. The website is www.redsulphuralchemy.com, sulfur written with PH. And so you can listen to her voice. My words are not half as good as her voice.
I can attest to actually the power of her voice. I have been listening to the audiobook in conjunction with reading it, and she really does an amazing job. I'm very much enjoying that. All right. Well, Robert, thank you so much. Just a note to everybody that's listening, if you are interested in joining Robbie for his 10-session webinar series that's going to be starting on January 7th, you can register
Together
for that.
with Pat Berry.
With Pat Berry, that's right, longtime Jungians, both of you, and based on Hillman's work, actually, Hillman's alchemy. So you can actually register for that through jungplatform.com, and you can also find out more information about it in the online community at depthpsychologyalliance.com. Robbie, thank you again for being with me. It's been absolutely amazing and fascinating to talk with you, and I just can't wait to read more of your work in Red Sulphur Alchemy.
Thank you so much. This was a great interview. I very much enjoyed it.
Me too.